So to start out, of course, you can't talk about the World War I without the start of it. So I took this picture that's up on the screen about 2 years back in Vienna. I was touring the Military History Museum there, and they have a beautiful display, well, I guess not so beautiful, showcasing the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. They have his car there, his uniform, and they have these 3 pistols that they took off of 3 of the assassins that day. There's no tracing these 3 pistols exactly. There's no way to know if one of them actually belonged to Gavrilo Princip, the assassin, but these 3 were taken off of 3 of the assassins that day. Just the police didn't take care to jot down the serial numbers and link them to the specific assassin they took it off. But just a very interesting thing that I was able to see, and I did try to buy them. You'll notice they're not here today. The museum didn't take kindly to that. Not sure how I could have gotten them back from Austria anyway, but it was worth a try. So to make things a little bit fun and more interesting, a little less boring than just me talking, I decided to do a little something of a game for each one of these rifles today, keep you engaged a little bit. So what I want you to do with each one of these is try to guess in your head, and maybe at the end of it you can shout out the answer if you know it, what country it's from. Starting out with a little song that was popular in that country at the time, then the name of the rifle in its native tongue, and then the flag of that country. So if we're ready, we'll start with 1. Any ideas? Yep. They get harder. So designed by Nicolas Lebel in the mid-1880s, this was the first military firearm in mainstream production to use smokeless ammunition. And it really sparked an arms race across the continent and across the world to try to compete with it. You'll notice it was called the M1886 M93. This was because in 1893 they did modify it, just fixing some early issues with it, an overcomplicated bolt face, complex rear sights, just made it easier to manufacture and use. So something that was unique about the Lebel design was that it had an 8-round tube magazine under the barrel, similar to a lot of shotguns. A 9th round was typically carried on the elevator that lifts it up from the tube up to the actual chamber, and even though you weren't advised to, you could theoretically hold a 10th round in the chamber, but you weren't advised to because it didn't have a mechanical safety. So the last thing the French wanted was a bunch of conscripts running around with a bullet in the chamber and no safety. However, you might notice when you hold it, it's on this side, there's this switch that when you do that, it essentially locks the elevator in place, and that is a magazine cutoff. And this is what the French were taught to do, because then every time you work the bolt, you have to load a new round in by hand, and it doesn't draw from the magazine, so that when you get into an emergency situation, you flip that switch back, and now you can draw from the 8-round magazine. So you can imagine the last thing you want is to be in an emergency situation and realize, oh, I have to load that tube magazine again. More than 3 million of them were produced between 1887 and 1920. It was the primary French service rifle for decades. During World War I, Serbia, Romania, and Greece used many thousands of them as well. In fact, it was one of the main service weapons of Romania during the war. It was planned to be replaced in French service, but ultimately they could not produce enough rifles to replace it. So you'll see 1886 Lebels, some of them produced in the 1890s, in service with French troops even in 1945 at the end of World War II. After the war, a lot of surplus rifles were sold to foreign buyers. You can imagine when the war is over, you don't have a need for 6 million rifles anymore when you're demobilizing. So one of the primary buyers of Lebels, or all French rifles at that time, was Ethiopia. And so afterwards you can come up and take a look, or if you can see it on the picture here, these are Amharic markings. That's the Ethiopian language. So this rifle was one of the ones sold to Ethiopia. At first glance, you might think that's a bad thing. It's kind of been butchered with those markings. It seems to me like they've actually been hand carved in, not stamped. But one nice thing about that is all Lebels left in France were rechambered to the 7.5 by 54 millimeter sometime after the war. The ones that went to Ethiopia were not. So ones like this are some of the only ones left that were still in their original configuration. All right, rifle number 2. So we do have another French one. So just 4 years after the Lebel was adopted into service, the French already were finding that it was becoming inadequate pretty quickly, especially for cavalry. As you can imagine, the Lebel is one of the longest rifles produced of that entire era. If you put it on the ground, and especially when it has the bayonet, it comes to about here. Without the bayonet, it's still about here. That's not a practical weapon, especially for cavalry. So the French adopted in 1890 a 3-shot en-bloc loading carbine specifically for cavalry use. But somebody really liked it. So in 1902, they developed it into a full-length rifle, which doesn't happen very often, a carbine becoming a rifle. In 1907, they produced this even further, developed it further to create the Berthier 1907. These were specifically designed and issued to Senegalese troops from West Africa. They figured it was 9 inches shorter than the Lebel, a pound lighter, and with the simple 3-round en bloc, a lot easier to teach a poorly trained conscript how to load it and shoot it. So they figured it was much easier for these colonial troops to use. Throughout the war, the majority of colonial troops, French African colonial troops especially, used these. But with a shortage of Lebels, a lot of French troops ended up using them as well. And so because of that, they needed to mass produce them again. So in 1915, there was a change. It introduced a straight bolt instead of curved and a simplified rear sight to just make it a bit more mass producible. In 1916, they also decided the 3-round capacity is just not enough. So they went ahead and just added on a metal magazine well to add a further 2 shots. So turned it into a 5-shot rifle now. Sorry, real quick, funny enough, the 5-shot rifle was so well liked that the French decided we're going to convert this into a carbine. So this is one of the very few examples, if any, it's the only one I know of, in which a carbine was made into a rifle back to a carbine again. Over 2 million of them were produced all the way into the 1930s, and just like the Lebel, they went all the way up into World War II and beyond. It was also the main rifle issued to African American troops that arrived, like the Harlem Hellfighters you might have heard of. The U.S. didn't equip them quite properly enough, and so it fell on the French. And so the Berthier was their main weapon. All right, number 3. This one's tricky. Any guess?
Ottoman Empire.
Yeah. So yes, this one was built in Germany, but it was used by the Ottomans. So tracing back the origins of this is the Kommissionsgewehr 1888. I just like saying that. Yeah. I took 2 years of German. I have to use it sometimes, you know. So developed by the German Army's Rifle Testing Commission with the help of the Mauser brothers. They came out with this rifle in 1888, and because it was built by the Rifle Testing Commission, it became commonly known as the Commission Rifle, so Kommissionsgewehr. As far from the German ingenuity that we probably envision with German weapons, this design borrowed the Mannlicher en bloc. I say that because right after production began, Steyr-Mannlicher actually filed a patent infringement suit against, I think it was against the German government as a whole. The Austro-Hungarian government managed to convince them to drop the suit by convincing Germany to allow Steyr to produce them on license, and so they set aside the patent suit and forgot it happened. The barrel and the rifling also were copied from the Lebel, so only the bolt itself was Mauser in origin. It has a floating barrel inside of a sheet metal tube, which really helps with accuracy over long durations of time because it doesn't shift the barrel as you shoot it. But it also means that water gets into this hollow metal tube around your barrel and stays there. So as you can imagine, in wet trench warfare, that's not ideal. In 1905, they modernized these, replacing the end block with a stripper clip system and upgrading from the 8 millimeter was the original cartridge, but it was rimless, and it was, I think, 8.08 millimeter. They replaced that with the 7.92 by 57 that we all know by now as the Mauser round. What I was wanting to show with this slide, especially, the manufacturer is Löwe Berlin, and I wanted to point this out because Gewehr 88s, I think, have a bit of a reputation sometimes as being dangerous or unreliable to shoot. This isn't necessarily proven in any way. Where this comes from was the chairman of Löwe & Company, which was Germany's largest arms manufacturer, Isidor Löwe. He was a Jew. And at that time, there was a member of the German parliament named Hermann Alvart, who was anti-Semitic, go figure. He started spreading rumors about this so-called Judenflinte, Jew musket, that he said was deliberately designed poorly so it would blow up in the face of German soldiers, and sort of had the opposite effect. He wanted this to ruin Löwe's career so that he would have to sell the company to a German so that there wouldn't be a Jew running Germany's largest arms builder. But what ended up happening was Alvart got arrested for slander and kicked out of parliament. So backfired, but some of those rumors still trickle down to this day. So if you ever hear Gewehr 88s are unreliable, I mean, I don't know, I would shoot it because this one was built in 1891, but that's where that comes from. This was issued to a reserve infantry regiment. The italicized R there indicates reserve infantry. A lot of Gewehr 88s were moved to reserve infantry regiments once the 98 started coming out. But after that, they began sending them to their allies like the Ottoman Empire. Records of about 100,000 to 250,000 of these going to the Ottomans. It's not their most numerous rifle, but the Ottomans didn't have a surplus. So if it went to them, unless it was lost, it was used. So there are signs, too, that this was Ottoman. It's going to be hard to see from back there, but there are crescents stamped on just about every part that you can imagine. I'll admit, I don't know if this was a inspection stamp, if it was just them marking their property, if there was some other reason for it, but like I said, I count half a dozen at least just on what's visible. But another great indicator is on the rear sight ladder. So that is Farsi, Persian, which was the official language of the Ottoman court, and that includes arsenals. Arsenals were part of the court, and thus everything that they did was done in Farsi. So that's obviously a great indicator that this was no longer a German rifle when it saw the end of its service. All right. This might be a little easy. Doesn't it seem like all German songs are the same? So yes, this is, go figure, a German rifle. So building on the successes of the 1888, Paul Mauser refined his design, and unlike the previous one, which he built in conjunction with the commission, he built this one essentially on his own, and this is, I would certainly argue, the epitome of the Mauser design. I don't know if anybody would disagree with that. I'm not a big Mauser person in general, so I can't speak to that, but like the 1888, it was originally chambered for that 8mm cartridge, the older one, but in 1903 it was converted. It was built, though, with a 5-round box magazine instead of an end block, so that was the first German rifle, at least, to do away with the end block. About 2 million of them were produced between 1898 and the start of the war, 1914, but here's an incredible bit of wartime engineering. A further 7 million were made in the next 4 years during the war. It took almost a year to late 1915 for it to replace the 88 in mainstream German service. But after that, it became the mainstay of the German army, pushing the 88 into reserves and to the Allies instead. They also developed two carbine variants during the war. These were mainly used by the cavalry, assault troops, mountaineers. But after the war, the Treaty of Versailles put a limit on how many full-length rifles the Germans could produce in the post-war period. Weirdly, they didn't limit carbines. So what did the Germans do? They made a new carbine. And so this was the Kar 98B, but after a few small modifications, it made the Kar 98K, which you might know was the mainstay of the German army in World War II. All right. This one, a little easy. Can you guess where this one's from? So there's not much I dare say about this rifle, especially in this crowd, because I don't think there's anyone in this room that knows less about this rifle than me. If you have any questions, I would direct you to Clay, because this one was actually his. So anything you want to know about it, ask him. He's your man.
Extra credit for the 48-star flag.
Thank you. Just the briefest overview. This was designed to replace the Krag Jorgensen and the 1873 trapdoor in U.S. service. A lot of influence from Mauser designs. The whole story about the Spanish-American War and how badly we were beaten by Spanish Mausers, that's been told 100 times over. And then again, we have over there a great example of a 1917. That was the most numerous rifle in American service during the war. It's a license-built pattern 14 Enfield from Britain. This was, of course, the second most. That's about all I dare say with any confidence in front of this crowd. But it was produced somewhere around 1912 based on the serial number, Springfield. And the barrel was replaced November 1916, still Springfield, and still wartime. So, well, before the war for us. So I'm happy with it being a true World War I rifle for that. All right.
Complaints this morning? Do we complain? Not we. What's the matter with lumps of onion floating around your tea? Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. Oh, be a soldier, eh? Oh, it's a shame to take the pay.
So if the accent and the dry humor wasn't enough, it is British, yes. So the iconic Lee Enfield series of rifles began in 1888 as the Lee Metford rifle. This was one of the only ones of the era not to use the Lebel, the Mannlicher, or the Mauser design when they were working. So it's one of those competitors during that period. Had a 10-round detachable magazine, a novelty for that period. Had a rear-mounted lug on the bolt for faster and easier working, of course. The smoothness of the Enfield action is kind of one of the most notorious things about them. The Lee Metford, though, was black powder, so they fixed that with the 303 Enfield smokeless cartridge. And so when they went back and reworked the Metford with that new cartridge, it became the Lee Enfield in 1895. But this rifle is the 6th iteration of the Lee Enfield design. So first, there was the magazine Lee Enfield, then the charger loading Lee Enfield, then the short magazine Lee Enfield, Mark I, Mark II, and Mark III, and then this is the 6th one. They decided that it was too complicated to produce during the war, so in 1915 they adopted the Mark III Star. If we go back, you can see that asterisk up there is important. It wasn't just a typo. The Star just meant that they eliminated the volley sights and the windage adjustment on the rear sights. A little bit unnecessary in the trenches. It also did away with that magazine cutoff that I referenced when we were talking about the Lebel. And it really did speed up the process of producing these. Before the war, there were about 100,000 of these made per year. By 1916, it was 400,000 per year. Overall, about 5 million were produced just during the war, including 1 million of them made in the U.S. And they saw service in every Commonwealth Army, and actually it's as far as I can tell, one of, if not the only mainstream rifle to see service in every front of the First World War as well. One of the users was India. So this rifle was made in Birmingham, but it was issued to the British Indian Army. I think some collectors, some people might find this a little less desirable than a true British rifle, but the service of India was actually really big during the war. There were over 1 million Indian soldiers that served. They were in France and Belgium from the first days of the war. They were in East Africa, Palestine, Mesopotamia. A lot of these rifles did end up staying in India, of course, so there's no way to tell if this was sent to the front or not. But it does have these inscriptions on that I've been trying to decipher. The circle with the ISA, that is the Indian Army. But at the top, I can't tell if it's IAOC or IADC, and that makes a big difference because from my research, it seems like that means either the Indian Army Ordnance Corps or Dental Corps. It makes more sense, the former, but part of me likes to imagine this rifle sitting in a dentist's office somewhere, but you never know. Just a note on terminology. So this was officially in parlance at that time called the Short Magazine Lee Enfield Mark III Star. But in 1926, backtrack, you'll notice that it says SHTLE 3-star, no mark, no magazine. They kind of did whatever they wanted with naming at that point. So in 1926, they tried to fix that by creating a naming convention, which became Rifle Number Blank Mark Blank. So retroactively, this becomes the Rifle Number 1 Mark III Star. When you get to World War II, that one was the Number 4 Mark I. All right. I did tell you they get harder. Any guesses?
Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Yes, sir. So in the late 1880s, another challenger to the race, the arms race, was Ferdinand Ritter von Mannlicher. The same year the Lebel was adopted, he introduced his own M1886, not to be confused with the Lebel, and this was the first straight pull rifle in the service of any nation around the world. It was also the first to introduce an en-bloc feed system, at least the first mass-produced. I think everybody knows what an en-bloc feed system is. There were several improved versions over the following years, and this one, of course, came out in 1895. This was the epitome of the design. Became the main weapon of the Austro-Hungarian army as well as the Bulgarian army, who bought a lot of them before the war. It had some amusing nicknames. The Austrians called it the Ruckzuck, which is in reference to, you can all see it's unloaded, right? It means you go Ruck, Zuck. That just means forward, back, essentially. Very unimaginative, but the Italians, though, had a name for it that was a little bit more morbid. They called it ta pum. Ta is the sound of the gun going off at a distance. It made something of a metallic-y sound. Pum was the bullet impacting, hopefully a rock or something nearby and not you or your buddy, but regardless, it was enough that they actually, where's my mouse? They actually wrote a song about it. So yeah, it is catchy, it's a little amusing, but if you read the lyrics, it's not so. The verse 1 goes, 20 days on Mount Ortegara, which was one of the bloodiest battlefields of the war, 20 days with no reprieve. Later it goes, I left my mother to become a soldier. Over the bridge, there's a cemetery of us soldiers. Maybe someday I'll join you. A little bit dark, but you wouldn't guess it from just listening to the song. Over the course of its life and during the war, the rifle was modified into a few variants. One of them was called the Stutzen, which for all intents and purposes is a carbine, but they called it a short rifle because what this one is a cavalry carbine. So they just didn't want two carbines to be confusing. The only real difference is that the Stutzen was literally a shortened version of the rifle. It kept the same sling configuration, kept a bayonet lug, it was just shorter. The cavalry carbine, by contrast, moved the slings to the side, as a lot of cavalry weapons did. So the original rifle had them underneath, like rifles do. This one moved them to the side. And also originally didn't have a bayonet lug. The issue was carbines proved very popular up in the mountains of Italy, as you can imagine. But there weren't enough Stutzen to go around, so they started taking cavalry carbines, the cavalry being kind of useless in the mountains, and just started putting those bayonet lugs on the cavalry carbines instead. So this isn't a aftermarket modification. This isn't something that someone bubbled together. This was an actual wartime modification that they did. The last thing I'll mention is you notice the first slide of this, I did have it in two languages. One was German, one was Hungarian. The reason I did this is the empire was very multi-ethnic at that time. There were over 30 different ethnicities and languages spoken in the empire at that time. The largest group of them, though, were Hungarians, who made up about half of the entire army and half of the casualties during the war. So since this was made in Budapest especially, I figured it was only fair that I give it its Hungarian name in their honor. Yeses? Italy. Speaking of Italy, so they were latecomers to the game because, not least, it took them until 1871 to truly achieve unification, so they got into it a little bit late. But designer Salvatore Carcano got into the game and created the Fucile Modello 1891, which just became known as the Carcano in his honor. This effectively made it a Mauser action with a Mannlicher N-block system. And in fact, it was originally called the Mannlicher Carcano in honor to give proper credit to Mannlicher for the design. But considering Italy and Austria were mortal enemies, they quickly dropped the Mannlicher part of the name. But Carcano, he didn't just want to copy it, he wanted to be a little bit better than the Austrian design. One shot better, to be exact. This is a 6-shot rifle instead of 5. Yeah, just so that Italy can have that one up over Austria. One area where it fell short, though, was that in order to accomplish this 6-shot capacity, it used a 6.5 by 52 millimeter round that became pretty quickly outdated. They didn't replace this round in mainstream service until 1945 when they adopted the 30-06 from us. There were about 700,000 on hand during the war, or at the start of the war. And like the Mannlicher, they made several variants of them, including a cavalry carbine. If you ever see Carcanos on the market, there's a good chance that it's a cavalry carbine. Just there are so many of them. They're the ones with the exposed barrel and the folding bayonet under the barrel, permanently fixed. But this one is the Moschetto per Truppe Speziali, the carbine for special troops. And this one's just like the Stutzen with the Mannlicher. It was meant for drivers, artillerymen, engineers. But again, it proved very popular up in the mountains. Go figure. The Italian front, I just wanted to bring these two especially. I love having the carbine variants of those two rifles because they're great representatives of the Italian front of the war. I think that gets overlooked a lot when people study World War I. You think of the trenches and the mud of the Western Front, or maybe a little bit of the Eastern Front, but Italy gets overlooked a lot, I think. All right, and this is the last one. By process of elimination, you might be able to guess this one if you didn't know it already, but it is Russia. So the Russian army went most of the 1800s without a very strong domestic arms industry. During their last war against the Ottomans in the 1890s, they actually relied almost entirely on American arms, like the Winchester 1866. That Winchester was the main weapon of the Russian army during that war. But in 1889, they managed to acquire, I couldn't find out how, a single Lebel rifle and a single round of ammunition for it without the powder. And yet they somehow managed to reverse engineer it, leave it to Russia, and created their entire own smokeless cartridge from that, and began building a rifle around that cartridge. So they held a contest, and two designers emerged on top. There was an army officer named Sergei Ivanovich Mosin and a Belgian designer named Leon Nagant. Mosin developed what he called the three-line rifle. A line was 1/10 of an inch, so 3 lines is 3/10 of an inch, or 7.62 millimeter. So that's how they get the caliber. Nagant's was 9 millimeter. That would be very interesting. I would like to see a 9 millimeter version of a rifle like that. Nagant's was favored, but they determined it was far too complicated to produce. So they said, why don't you two work together and come up with something that kind of combines your two designs? But there's always controversy when there's competition, right? So during the second round of testing, Nagant borrowed Mosin's interrupter design, but the issue was Mosin was a Russian officer, so he couldn't file patents himself. So Nagant was able to pass off the design as his own, and he filed a patent suit against Mosin, completely throwing the entire competition out the window, because he was the only Western arms designer willing to work with Russia at that time, so they didn't want to get rid of him. So they paid him off quietly under the table to keep designing for them, and that's how they end up with things like the Nagant 1895 revolver. But in the interim, while he was upset and trying to file this patent dispute, he went back home to Belgium for a little bit, and while he was there, he began spreading the word about this amazing Mosin Nagant rifle, making sure that his name was put on it. Back in Russia, though, the Tsar formally decreed that no man's name should be put on a rifle to avoid causing controversies just like this. So in Russia, it was known as either the three-line rifle or just the 1891 rifle. But in the West, it was known as the Mosin Nagant, which is how we come to know it as such. When the Bolsheviks took over, they ended up calling it Mosin's rifle when they gave him a Hero of the Soviet Union award. And so, again, if you ask a Russian today, they'll say, Nagant? Who's Nagant? This is Mosin's. It's very similar in design to the later 1891-30 that was used during World War II. The main differences were this one is 2.5 inches longer, but about 1 pound heavier than the 91-30. It also had, I guess I can show up here, the front sling swivel was originally right here. And they quickly found that was weird with the center of gravity, so they moved it forward to the slit in the stock that we all now know. They also didn't have a guard or a hood on the front sight, so it's fairly easy to recognize at a glance. This one was one of the last rifles to be made in the Imperial Tula Arms plant. This is because, of course, when the communists took over in 1917, they quickly got rid of the Imperial name. So there's still a lot of Tula weapons that were made thereafter, but not Imperial. Another thing with these is a lot of them ended up in Finnish hands. I think if you go on Gunbroker and try to buy a Mosin, there's a very good chance that unless it's a late World War II, it's probably going to be Finnish. These weren't all captured, contrary to what a lot of vendors on Gunbroker will try to lead you to believe. Not everything was captured just because it was Finnish. Finland was a province of the Russian Empire. There were Finns in the Russian army, so when Finland became independent, they inherited a large number of them. However, they almost all would have the SA in a box stamp on the receiver for Suomen Armeija, the Finnish army. This one doesn't have that. Another indicator of Finnish is on the left side of the rear sight. This is in Arshin. Arshin is about 2 1/3 feet. And that was just how the Russians did it at that period. These are always marked on the left side of the ladder, but the Finns, when they did get their hands on them, either captured or just in an arsenal, they would just take either a chisel or something and just put a line through those numbers, and then on the right side of the ladder, put the meters equivalent. And then the final thing is the iconic sling slit in the stocks for the dog collar slings, as they're called. The Russians were really the only ones that used this, and so whenever these were captured by anyone else, they said, well, how are we going to put our sling in this? The Finns had a more permanent design, so if you're shopping for these, you'll see a lot of the Finnish ones. They have a more permanent thing where there's a cover over the slit, again, to keep dirt and stuff from getting in that hole, and usually have a screw holding it in place. But the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, and during the 30s, the Spanish, during the Spanish Civil War, got a lot of these, and they pretty much improvised in the field with just a wire that just pinched inside there. And so with this, if you pick it up and look in there, you can just see that there's two ends that don't quite meet inside there. Very improvised design. So I can't tell if this one is a German or Austrian capture, if it was sold to Spain during the Spanish Civil War, I'm not quite sure, but it does have those rectangular sling swivels on there that tell that it probably went somewhere besides Russia at least. So either way, it's a cool story. And that is all I have.
So I recently purchased a CS Pettengill Army model revolver, which, as you can tell, is very ergonomically designed, not muzzle heavy at all. It's a percussion 44 caliber revolver. And the Pettengill Army revolver holds the distinction as being the only fully hammerless revolver to see U.S. military service during the Civil War. A mechanically radical design that stands apart from every other percussion revolver of the period. C.S. Pettengill of New Haven, Connecticut, received patent 15,388 on July 22nd, 1856 for his self-cocking hammerless design. The design was then improved, self-cocking because it means you have to pull the trigger a whole lot harder. Production of all Pettengill variants was undertaken by Rogers and Spencer of Willowvale, New York. The U.S. government contracted in December of '61 for 5,000 Army model revolvers at $20 each. But Army testing revealed severe fouling problems that essentially locked the action after limited firing, which makes a lot of sense, honestly, because you have this enclosed system and all that fouling would just plug it up like crazy. So it's, obviously work a lot better with smokeless powder, but they didn't have that available at the time, and so that was the Achilles heel of these guns. So the order was cut to 2,001 units. All 2,001 were delivered between October 20th of '62 and January 17th of '63 and issued to cavalry regiments, including the 3rd Michigan, 3rd Missouri State Militia, 5th Missouri State Militia, 1st Arkansas, 3rd Illinois, 3rd Kentucky, and 3rd Missouri Volunteers, serial numbered from where the Navy model left off, which was about 1,300 on up. Total production for civilian and military of about 3,400.
Well, in the theory, if you can't get the best, if you can't get the prettiest, go for the oldest. Right, ladies?
Been lucky here lately. A few of my friends are starting to get out of their collections, and I've been able to step up a little bit and get a few things. This is called a cabaset. The cabaset was used in the 1500s and the 1600s. Primarily by the Italian, but also quite a bit by the Spanish in these time periods. If you look along the side, you can see that series of rosettes, and that's where basically they were rivets to hold in the leather around the outside, like kind of a sweatband. This was probably from the late 1700s. It is marked both with a manufacturer from Spain, fairly well-known one, is on the blade. There's also a Passau, or P-A-S-S-A-U, Passau, marked from Germany. So the suspicion is this blade was probably made in Germany, sent down and then assembled and finished up down in Spain. Again, we're talking probably mid-16s to early 1700s rapier. As you can see, it's possibly a couple inches longer than the other one. They did some beautiful work on the cup. This is called a cup hilt rapier. And again, pick these up and feel them, because it's the balance of these. There's some, you know, all these replicas we see that we think are so great, they're heavy, they're point heavy. You get the ones they were actually using, and they're a very lethal thing, and they are where you could fight a good long time with them. And as you can see, again, it's kind of this is more of a broadsword than a rapier. This one's meant to cut and thrust, both. And if you look at it later on, there's some very good markings down here, which I haven't been able to follow back on in this area right here. But that would be a really good clue on who the maker was on the sword. Quite typically, they would send over the blade, and then the grandee or whoever would have the hilt and the guard made to their specifications.
So what I have here is a C.B. Holden open frame rifle from 1862. It's in 44 rimfire, and it's quirky. It fires, it's a striker fire, and that's how you get the striker cock. And then the breech also slides back. You have to unlock it with this. If this is closed, the breech won't open. And it's like I said, 44 short rimfire. And they made less than 200 of them. And this one, I'm proud to say, is serial number 2. So I think it was made somewhere around 1862. It has a real interesting, well done, really well done mechanism inside it's a plate. There's no, this is open, and that's what it's supposed to be. There's no missing cover plate. The military didn't really want to get dirt in them, so they didn't think they'd function too well in the military.
A long time ago, I started collecting Winchester shotguns, and one of my goals was I took a 100-year period, 1880 to 1980, and I wanted to buy one shotgun, one model for every shotgun made in that 100-year period. So I reached my goal a short time ago with Model 21 here. Went home, I wanted to get it lettered up in the Cody Museum. So I talked to Jessica Dennett up there and said, I'd like to letter it, what's the serial number? She won't letter. This serial number on this thing is 666. First year of production, maybe the first month of production. And so she said, and I didn't believe it, I believe her, she said the first 10,000 Model 21s, there's no record of them. You can't get a letter on if it's 1 through 10,000, so don't even try. So a lot of people said it was an overrated shotgun, and I don't know, but they only sold 30,000 of them. In 1960, they gave their patent rights to Connecticut Shotgun Company. Eventually got them. So the Connecticut Shotgun Company is now making Winchester 21s, starting price at $15,000. I mean, it's bizarre. I don't know why a gun like this would cost $15,000 bucks, but that's what it is.
In keeping with the First World War, I brought this in. It's a Warner Swayze sniper scope. Let me set this down here. Some of you have seen them and some of you haven't. This particular one is a 1913. The first model was a 1908. And the 1908 looks very similar. There are three real easy ways to tell if you have a 1908. And that is, it does not have the cruciform knob here. And it says 1908 here. the field of view. Now, the magnification of the '08 model was 6x. This one was 5.2x. And the reason why was because they wanted a wider field of view.